Rebecca Hayes thought she was about to embarrass another helpless customer in front of the entire bank, but she had no idea that within the next 10 minutes, her own career would begin collapsing in complete silence. The morning light poured through the towering glass windows of Atlantic National Bank, casting reflections across the polished marble floors as wealthy clients moved between velvet ropes and private offices. Expensive watches glimmered beneath tailored sleeves. Quiet conversations echoed beneath crystal chandeliers. Everything about the building whispered status, power, and money. And then Evelyn Carter walked in. At 50 years old, Evelyn looked painfully out of place among the luxury and perfection surrounding her. Her gray cardigan hung loosely over a simple white blouse, and her worn leather handbag rested carefully against her side as though she had carried it for years. Her short dark hair, touched with silver near the temples, framed a calm face untouched by makeup or pretense. She moved quietly through the lobby, almost invisible to everyone except Rebecca Hayes. From behind the customer service desk, Rebecca immediately noticed her. At 35, Rebecca had perfected the polished image Atlantic National demanded from its employees. Her blonde bob was immaculate. Her navy blazer fit sharply against her posture. Even her smile seemed rehearsed to match the prestige of the institution. But beneath that polished professionalism lived something colder. Years inside one of Boston's most elite banks had taught Rebecca to judge people within seconds. Expensive suit? Valuable client. Designer handbag? Priority treatment. Simple clothes and nervous posture? Waste of time. Her eyes narrowed slightly as Evelyn approached the counter, holding a manila folder against her chest. "Good morning," Evelyn said softly. "I'd like to make a deposit and open a new charitable account." Rebecca forced a thin smile. "Of course," she replied, though the tone in her voice carried the sharp edge of impatience. Evelyn carefully slid a check across the polished counter. The moment Rebecca saw the amount, her expression changed. $250,000. For half a second, the bank teller froze. Then came the look, the subtle smirk, the silent judgment. Rebecca leaned back slowly in her chair and glanced at Evelyn's cardigan again before speaking loud enough for nearby customers to hear. "Ma'am," she said, her voice dripping with disbelief, "this is a $250,000 deposit." A few people nearby turned their heads. The room grew quieter, and Evelyn Carter suddenly realized every eye in the bank was now on her. Rebecca lifted the check carefully between two fingers as though she was afraid to touch it for too long. The disbelief on her face slowly hardened into suspicion. "Where exactly did you get this?" she asked. Evelyn blinked softly, caught off guard by the sudden hostility in the woman's tone. "It is from the Carter Family Foundation," she answered politely. "We are opening a new account for a children's hospital program." Rebecca glanced at the paperwork inside the folder without truly reading it. Her attention remained fixed on Evelyn's appearance. The old cardigan, the inexpensive shoes, the weathered handbag resting against the marble counter. None of it matched the number printed on the check. Around them, nearby conversations had begun fading. Wealthy customers waiting in line exchanged curious looks while a young associate standing behind Rebecca shifted uncomfortably. Rebecca gave a small laugh that did not sound friendly. "A children's hospital program," she repeated slowly. "That is very generous." The sarcasm in her voice was impossible to miss. Evelyn kept her composure. "All the documentation is included in the folder," she explained quietly. "The foundation office called ahead yesterday." Rebecca ignored the comment completely. Instead, she leaned closer across the desk. "Ma'am, people do not usually walk into Atlantic National carrying checks this large without proper financial representation." Evelyn frowned slightly. "I am sorry. I do not understand." Rebecca sighed dramatically and sat back in her chair. "What I mean is," she said loudly enough for several customers to hear, "this bank handles serious clients. Transactions of this size require verification." A middle-aged man in an expensive gray suit glanced over his newspaper. Two women near the investment offices stopped walking entirely. Evelyn could feel the attention gathering around her like pressure inside the room. Her cheeks warmed with embarrassment, but she refused to let her voice shake. "Everything should already be verified," she replied gently. "I brought every document your office requested." Rebecca finally opened the folder, flipping through the paperwork with exaggerated skepticism. Then she suddenly stopped and stared at Evelyn again. "Wait," she said sharply. You are telling me you personally represent a foundation moving millions of dollars. The silence around the lobby deepened. Evelyn nodded once. Rebecca let out another quiet laugh, this one colder than before. I think there has been some misunderstanding, she said. Because honestly, you do not exactly look like someone handling multi-million-dollar charitable accounts. The words landed harder than Rebecca realized. Even the customers watching nearby looked uncomfortable now. But Evelyn did not argue. She simply lowered her eyes toward the polished counter and tightened her grip on the worn leather strap of her handbag while the marble lobby fell into an uneasy silence. Rebecca slowly closed the folder and slid it back across the counter with 2 fingers, her polished nails tapping against the cardboard as though she had already made her decision. I do not think we are going to be able to process this today, she said flatly. Evelyn looked up in confusion. Why not? Rebecca tilted her head slightly, wearing the kind of smile that was meant to appear professional but carried unmistakable contempt underneath. Because there are too many inconsistencies. Evelyn blinked. Inconsistencies. $250,000 deposit from a charitable foundation usually involves attorneys, financial managers, or executive representatives, Rebecca explained loudly. Not someone walking in alone with a worn handbag. A few customers nearby exchanged awkward glances. The young associate behind the desk looked down quickly, pretending to organize papers he clearly was not reading. Evelyn swallowed softly. I am the foundation director, she said. Everything is legitimate. Rebecca gave a short laugh. Ma'am, Atlantic National takes fraud prevention very seriously. The word fraud hung heavily in the air. Several people in the lobby looked over immediately. One older woman seated near the private banking offices slowly lowered her coffee cup. The atmosphere inside the bank shifted completely. Evelyn could feel it. The judgment, the suspicion, the silent assumptions spreading through the room before she even had a chance to defend herself. I am not committing fraud, Evelyn said quietly. Rebecca folded her arms. Then you should understand why this situation raises concerns. She turned toward the security desk near the entrance and gave a subtle nod. The movement was small, but Evelyn noticed it instantly. So did several customers nearby. Her face flushed with humiliation. For a moment, it looked as though she might argue back, but instead she simply took a slow breath and steadied herself against the marble counter. The silence around them became suffocating. Rebecca mistook Evelyn's composure for weakness. Honestly, she continued, lowering her voice into a patronizing tone, people handling this level of money usually present themselves differently. Evelyn stared at her for a second, hurt flickering quietly behind her calm expression. Not anger, not outrage, just disappointment. Differently, she repeated softly. Rebecca glanced down at Evelyn's faded cardigan again. You know what I mean. The room went still. Even the soft piano music playing through the lobby suddenly felt distant beneath the tension hanging in the air. Evelyn lowered her eyes for a moment before carefully placing the check back into the folder. I understand, she whispered. Thank you for your time. She turned slowly away from the counter, unaware that at that exact moment, the glass entrance doors behind her had just begun to open. The massive glass doors swung open with a soft hydraulic hiss just as Evelyn turned away from the counter, clutching her folder against her chest. At first, nobody paid attention. Another client entering the bank was hardly unusual at Atlantic National. But within seconds, the atmosphere inside the marble lobby changed in a way Rebecca Hayes could not immediately explain. A tall man stepped through the entrance wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal coat over a navy suit. His silver-streaked dark hair was neatly combed back, and his calm expression carried the quiet confidence of someone completely accustomed to power. He moved without hurry, yet the moment he crossed the lobby floor, reactions began rippling through the room. One of the security guards near the entrance instantly straightened his posture. A private banking associate nearly dropped the tablet she was carrying. Even the branch manager inside the glass executive office suddenly looked up from his meeting and froze. Evelyn noticed none of it at first. She was too focused on holding herself together after the humiliation she had just endured. But Rebecca noticed. Her confident expression faltered slightly as she watched the branch manager rush out of his office faster than she had ever seen before. Mr. Carter, the manager said nervously, forcing a smile as he approached the man near the center of the lobby. We were not expecting you this morning. The room fell almost completely silent. Rebecca felt her stomach tighten. Carter. The name hit her instantly. William Carter, founder of Carter Global Investments. One of the most influential financial figures in Boston. A man whose company managed billions of dollars across multiple institutions, including Atlantic National itself. Rebecca's face slowly lost color. She turned sharply toward Evelyn, her mind suddenly racing through everything she had just said, everything she had implied. William's eyes moved calmly across the room until they landed on Evelyn, standing quietly near the counter with her folders still pressed against her chest. His expression softened immediately. Evelyn, he said gently as he walked toward her. The sound of her name in his voice made the entire room still itself even further. Rebecca stared in disbelief as William stopped beside Evelyn and placed a reassuring hand lightly against her shoulder. I finished my meeting early, he said softly. Did everything go smoothly? Evelyn hesitated for the briefest moment. That hesitation told William everything. His eyes slowly lifted toward Rebecca. The branch manager suddenly looked as though he could barely breathe. Nearby customers who had watched Evelyn being humiliated moments earlier now stood frozen in uncomfortable silence. Rebecca opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Because in that horrifying instant, she realized the simple woman she had just treated like a criminal was not merely connected to wealth. She was Mrs. Evelyn Carter. Rebecca's throat tightened so suddenly she could barely swallow. The confident posture she had maintained all morning collapsed beneath the weight of realization spreading across the lobby. William Carter stood beside Evelyn with calm authority, one hand resting gently against his wife's shoulder, while the branch manager hovered nearby, looking visibly panicked. Nobody moved. Nobody even seemed willing to breathe too loudly. The tension inside Atlantic National had become suffocating. Rebecca forced herself to stand from behind the counter. Mr. Carter, she stammered weakly, attempting a nervous smile. I did not realize. William's eyes settled on her with a calmness that somehow felt far worse than anger. No, he interrupted quietly. You did not. The branch manager immediately stepped forward, desperate to contain the disaster unfolding in front of half the lobby. Sir, I assure you there has been some kind of misunderstanding, he said quickly. Mrs. Carter is one of our most valued philanthropic clients. Rebecca's stomach dropped even further. Philanthropic clients. Suddenly, every document she had ignored inside Evelyn's folder replayed in her mind. The Carter Family Foundation, children's hospitals, scholarship programs, millions donated across Massachusetts. And she had treated the woman standing in front of her like a criminal simply because of her clothes. Evelyn lowered her eyes slightly, clearly uncomfortable with the attention now flooding the room. William, she said softly, it is fine. I was just leaving. William turned toward her, his expression immediately gentler again. Leaving, he repeated quietly. After being publicly humiliated while trying to fund a hospital project? The room went dead silent. Several customers who had silently watched Rebecca mock Evelyn moments earlier now looked deeply uncomfortable. One older man slowly folded his newspaper and stared at the marble floor. Even the young associate behind the desk seemed ashamed to lift his eyes. William finally looked back at Rebecca. My wife spends most of her time helping sick children and funding schools, he said calmly. She walks into this bank dressed simply because she does not care about appearances. Rebecca felt heat rising into her face. Sir, I truly apologize if... William repeated softly. He was not raising his voice. That was what made the moment feel so crushing. You implied fraud. You threatened security. You embarrassed her in front of an entire lobby. Rebecca's hands trembled visibly now. The branch manager wiped nervous sweat from his forehead, while several employees nearby stood frozen in absolute silence. William glanced once toward the folder still resting on the counter. Do you know what that check was for? He asked quietly. Rebecca could not answer. A new pediatric cancer wing at St. Anne's Children's Hospital, Williams said. And for 10 minutes, you treated the woman funding it like she did not belong inside your bank. Rebecca felt as though the polished marble floor beneath her heels had suddenly disappeared. Every pair of eyes in the lobby remained fixed on her, while William Carter stood motionless beside Evelyn, calm and composed in a silence far more devastating than shouting could ever be. The branch manager cleared his throat nervously and stepped closer to the counter. Mrs. Carter, he said quickly, forcing another strained smile. Please allow us to correct this situation immediately. We deeply value your foundation's partnership. Evelyn looked exhausted now, not angry, not dramatic, simply tired in the quiet way people become after being humiliated in public. She held the folder against her chest, as though protecting something fragile inside herself. I did not come here for special treatment, she said softly. I only came to help finish the hospital account. Paperwork. Her voice was gentle, but somehow that only made the shame inside the room grow heavier. William glanced around the lobby slowly. Customers who had stared at Evelyn earlier now avoided eye contact completely. One woman near the investment office shook her head under her breath as though disgusted by what she had witnessed. The young associate behind Rebecca finally spoke up quietly. She did bring every required document, he admitted. Everything was already verified. Rebecca closed her eyes for half a second. That single sentence felt like another blow. William turned toward the branch manager again. How many charitable organizations bank with Atlantic National? He asked calmly. Hundreds, sir. The manager answered immediately. William nodded once. And how many people walk through these doors every day who do not wear designer suits? The manager said nothing. Nobody did. The silence spreading through the lobby felt almost painful now. William's gaze shifted back toward Rebecca. You judged my wife before you read a single page in that folder, he said quietly. Not because of evidence. Because of appearance. Rebecca's carefully practiced professionalism had completely collapsed. I am truly sorry, Mrs. Carter, she whispered, her voice trembling. I made assumptions I should not have made. Evelyn studied her for a long moment. Then, to everyone's surprise, she gave a small nod. Not triumphant, not cruel, just calm. We all make assumptions sometimes, she said gently. The important thing is what we choose to learn from them. The branch manager looked stunned by her grace. Rebecca looked even worse, because forgiveness somehow hurt more than punishment. William slowly picked up the folder from the counter and handed it back to Evelyn with quiet care. Do you still want to work with this bank? He asked softly. Evelyn glanced around the silent lobby one final time before answering. I still believe institutions can change, she said, but only when people inside them remember how to treat others with dignity first. The lobby remained frozen long after Evelyn finished speaking. Her words lingered beneath the crystal chandeliers like a quiet truth nobody inside Atlantic National could escape anymore. Dignity. Such a simple word. Yet in that moment, it seemed more valuable than every investment portfolio and private account hidden behind the polished office doors upstairs. Rebecca stood motionless behind the counter, her face pale beneath the bright bank lighting. For the first time in years, she no longer looked confident or composed. She looked small, not because William Carter had embarrassed her, but because she had been forced to confront something far more painful than public humiliation. Herself. The branch manager cleared his throat carefully. Mrs. Carter, he said softly, if you would allow us another opportunity, I will personally oversee the hospital account setup myself. Evelyn looked at him for a moment before giving a polite nod. Thank you, she answered quietly. The manager immediately motioned toward the private client offices upstairs, eager to repair the damage already spreading through the lobby. But before Evelyn could move, William turned slightly toward Rebecca one final time. There is something important you should understand, he said calmly. Rebecca lifted her eyes slowly. My wife grew up with very little, William continued. She spent years volunteering in children's hospitals long before we had money. Even now, she still shops at discount stores and drives the same old sedan she has owned for almost a decade. Rebecca listened in silence while nearby employees stood perfectly still. The reason she dresses simply, William said, is because she believes money should improve lives, not appearances. The room grew quiet again. One of the older customers near the waiting area slowly nodded to himself as though the words had struck something deep inside him. William glanced toward the large folder in Evelyn's hands. That hospital project will help hundreds of families who cannot afford treatment for their children, he said. And for a few minutes this morning, the person funding it was treated as though she did not deserve basic respect. Rebecca lowered her head completely now. I understand, she whispered weakly. Evelyn stepped forward before William could say another word. Her expression remained calm, though sadness still lingered quietly in her eyes. I do not want anyone fired, she said gently. The branch manager blinked in surprise. Rebecca looked up immediately. But I do hope this bank remembers something after today, Evelyn continued softly. Not every valuable person walks through the door wearing luxury brands. A hush fell across the marble lobby. Even the faint piano music overhead seemed to disappear beneath the weight of her words. And somewhere deep inside Atlantic National Bank, far beyond the polished counters and expensive suits, something uncomfortable had finally begun to crack. The private client office upstairs overlooked downtown Boston through towering glass windows, but even the breathtaking skyline could not ease the tension still lingering from the humiliation downstairs. Evelyn sat quietly at the polished conference table while senior executives rushed around preparing documents, coffee, and apologies nobody had bothered offering her an hour earlier. The contrast was impossible to ignore. The same employees who once avoided eye contact with her now spoke carefully, almost nervously, as though afraid of saying the wrong thing again. William noticed it too. He remained calm beside Evelyn, reviewing paperwork while the branch manager personally finalized the hospital account opening. Downstairs, however, Rebecca Hayes sat alone behind her desk in complete silence. The lobby had returned to normal on the surface. Customers resumed conversations. Keyboards clicked softly. Phones rang. But something inside the atmosphere had permanently shifted. Employees who once admired Rebecca's polished confidence now looked at her differently. Not with fear, not even with anger, with disappointment. The young associate who had witnessed everything earlier quietly approached the counter, holding a stack of account forms. For several seconds he said nothing. Then finally, in a careful voice, he asked, "Why did you assume she was lying?" Rebecca stared at the marble floor beneath her desk. At first, she did not answer, because the truth sounded ugly when spoken out loud. "I do not know," she admitted weakly. But deep down, she did know. She had spent years inside a world where appearance became shorthand for value. Luxury meant importance. Simplicity meant insignificance. Somewhere along the way, she stopped seeing people and started seeing categories instead. And that realization hurt more than William Carter's disappointment ever could. Upstairs, the paperwork for the children's hospital project was finally complete. The branch manager carefully slid the final document toward Evelyn with both hands. "Everything is officially approved," he said. "Construction funding will begin immediately." Evelyn smiled softly for the first time all morning. "Thank you," she replied. "A lot of families have been waiting for this." William watched her quietly, pride visible in his eyes. Despite everything that had happened downstairs, Evelyn still cared more about the hospital than herself. That was who she had always been. As the meeting ended, the branch manager hesitated before speaking again. "Mrs. Carter," he said carefully, "I hope today does not change your view of this institution completely." Evelyn paused near the office door, her hand resting lightly against the polished brass handle. "Institutions are made of people," she answered softly. "And people always have the ability to become better." The room fell silent again, because everyone inside understood she was offering something far greater than forgiveness. She was offering them a chance to change. By late afternoon, the golden sunlight spilling across downtown Boston reflected against the towering glass windows of Atlantic National Bank, but inside the building, the atmosphere still carried the quiet aftermath of a lesson nobody there would soon forget. Employees moved more carefully now. Conversations were softer. Even the polished marble lobby somehow felt different after witnessing how quickly appearances could deceive. Rebecca Hayes remained at her desk long after most of the morning crowd had disappeared. The usual confidence in her posture was gone. In its place sat a woman replaying every word she had spoken to Evelyn Carter over and over inside her mind. She had built her career on reading people quickly, or at least she believed she had. But that morning shattered the illusion she had trusted for years. Near closing time, the young associate approached her desk once more. "Mrs. Carter left this for you," he said quietly, placing a small white envelope beside her keyboard before walking away. Rebecca stared at it for several seconds before slowly opening it with trembling hands. Inside was a handwritten note in elegant blue ink. "True wealth is revealed in how we treat people when we believe they have nothing to offer us." Rebecca read the sentence twice, then a third time. Her eyes slowly filled with tears she quickly tried to hide from nearby coworkers. There was no anger in Evelyn's words, no revenge, no humiliation returned, only truth. And somehow, That truth cut deeper than punishment ever could. Upstairs, William and Evelyn stepped out of the executive elevator together toward the private parking entrance. The branch manager followed closely behind them, still apologizing quietly for everything that had happened. But Evelyn simply smiled gently. "I hope today changes more than policy," she said softly. "I hope it changes perspective." Outside, the evening air carried the cool breeze of early autumn as William opened the passenger door of their old silver sedan. The car looked almost laughably ordinary beside the rows of luxury vehicles lining the private parking lane, but Evelyn loved it anyway. Before getting inside, she glanced back once toward the massive bank building towering behind them. Thousands of people would walk through those doors in the years ahead. Some rich, some struggling, some dressed in expensive suits, others in worn cardigans carrying old handbags. And every single one of them deserved dignity before judgment. William gently squeezed Evelyn's hand as they climbed into the car together. Neither of them spoke during the drive home. They did not need to, because sometimes the most powerful victories arrive without shouting, without revenge, and without cruelty. Sometimes the deepest lesson comes in silence.